Hey guys, Ryan Earnhardt here from CreativeSoundLab.tv. Today we're going to be going into some detail on the tube amps behind me. So just kind of giving you a little bit of a rundown of what I like to use each amp. We've already heard a couple of examples. I'll be kind of cutting back to a couple of them to remind you how they sound. Just kind of walking you through a couple of the different amps, what I like to use them for. Let's get started. Let's start out with the stuff that I got from my friend Flint. It was this amp, this amp, this amp, this amp, this amp. You know, they're like quirky stuff, right? So they're like tones in a box. They don't do a whole lot other than like one thing. When you start getting into like the 6156, the 6150, which I blew up with my friend Garrett Derhofer, those Gretches are actually really nice. You can play them clean, you can dig into them a little bit. You're not gonna really play this guy clean, you know? It's gonna be dirty. It's great for like harmonica, like blues harmonica. You just wanna plug in, you know, a mic and let it rip. Same thing with the harmony. I mean, this what is probably made for is harmonica or a small amp. So yeah, lots of cool tone, okay? It's like one sound. So as we get a little bit bigger, a little bit more expensive, we have more features of the amp, such as tremolo. This one has speed and intensity. This one has tremolo, but it's just, you know, speed and then off. No tremolo, just tone. No tone, just volume. Just volume. Some tone, but mostly just the options of different inputs. Just volume. So some of these amps just have volume, and that's what makes them kind of harmonica, one kind of sound. But then you have the nicer amps, you have the features, you have volume, tone, speed, and intensity. Here you have, you know, reverb built in. So these are more flexible, obviously. Same thing with the techs, way more flexible. So what do I like to use these things for? Well, this is great for anything you want just thick, muddy, angry sounding. Like you want it to sound angry, especially any sort of blues. That's the amp. The tube's red plate on them, and my tech was like, I don't know what to do. Like they're just running super hot. It's angry, okay? It's an awesome sounding amp.
Leaving here, it ain't no sign of regret. Put some space between me and the violent red.
Danelectro, really cool amp, late 50s, I believe. It sounds kind of bluesy. It has a little bit more articulation to it. When you really crank it, it kind of caves in on itself. It's a really cool sound. This amp was actually used on a song called String by Flint Ziegler. Here's a little bit about how it sounds.
Got your hip against the sink. Bedroom wars and dirty secrets. We talk like lovers on the brink.
Okay, killer sound. That was the sound of this amp cranked, and you can hear it just kind of like was almost just caving in on itself. So angry, caving in. Then this guy is all black keys, I think. You know, the Oxford 1962 speaker, 12-inch. It just sounds sandy, like really sandy and distorted. And it's got kind of an upper mid-range push that allows for something like a bass guitar to sit right under it. It's really nice. It goes really good with a Les Paul. These guys would go better with something like an SG or a Telly or Fat Telly. So this is definitely a brighter amp than these two. Great tremolo, interesting reverb, kind of shrill, really cool amp. The Gretsch. The Gretsch is a little bit more feature-packed. We have a tremolo, we have a tone, and a volume, and we have a couple different inputs. Kind of mid-rangey tone. That's a really nice breakup. It can do the compressed sound, the kind of dirty sound, and then of course the overdriven sound.
Fervent in the lost, gone for quite some time. It's hard to keep the faith when you're not by my side. It's hard to know you're mine. When will you come home? When will I see your face? Will we be the same? When will you come home? When will I see your face? Will we be the same?
Let's go on to this Danelectro. This is some sort of kit amp. We've got a couple different inputs. It's got a tone and a volume. Looks like it's an 8-inch speaker in there. Not very big, but... So yeah, it's definitely a very interesting amp. I haven't played around with it enough, but this would be a cool amp for solos, any sort of black keys type of stuff. I know I've mentioned them a lot, but yeah, really, really interesting sounding distortion. It's got a unique sound, but I think it's cool. I think it's very cool. Next up we have the Harmony H303A, H303B. Warning, it does not have a transformer, power transformer I think it is. So if you swap the hot and cold when you plug in the amp, you might actually have 110 volts on guitar strings. This is the H303A, so it's got a transformer, it's safer. You know, it's a one-trick pony. I actually rarely use it. The main thing I use it for is vocal reamping. It's a great amp for vocal reamping. It doesn't get very loud, but it sounds really cool, you know, on vocal. On guitar, it's like, yeah, you know. To get the sound that I got in the test in the last video, you'd have to do like a preamp pedal before it, or a compressor pedal, and just run it hot going into the amp. That's basically all that I did. Naturally, on its own, it doesn't sound that distorted, actually. It sounds darker, and, you know, I usually set it about, you know, 6, 7, 8 out of 10. And it's a great vocal reamp.
I'm dumping beer down the sink. We talk on and on for hours, never saying anything.
I'll be doing a video on vocal reamping and kind of shooting out some amps that are good for vocal reamping, and kind of showing you a little bit about what I like to do to get the sound. Sometimes I don't even use the amp, I just use the room sound from vocal reamping. So we'll be talking about that the next few weeks. Okay, moving on to the Tex amp 5 watt. That's what the model's called, is 5 watt. It's a really, really cool amp. This amp is it's pretty new. The speaker is brand new. So owner of this amp, Steve, he kind of warned me. He said, you know, it might be a little bright because the speaker needs some time to break in. It's got Class A if you push it down, and then it's the top boost push-pull if you pull it up like that. So I don't know much about the amp or the circuit, but he just said, hey, you know, push-pulls, you know, you pull it up, and then the Class A if you push it down. So here's the examples back to back of what this amp sounds like. Here it is. Okay, so, I mean, a huge difference there. This amp can do a lot of different tone fluctuation. You know, there's no tremolo, no reverb, nothing like that. It's just, you know, all tone here. It'd be great for pedals. Be great for just natural amp tone if you want the overdriven sound of a Vox. So, really cool tone here. Okay, let's talk about the Princetons. The Princeton Brown, what is it, 63. So this is really close to like the Tuxedo Princeton, for example. That came out the following year. I've noticed about the Browns is that they're really good at like rhythm tracks. Our friend Steve has a Brown Deluxe 61, and it sounds amazing. In fact, we actually used it. I've used it here at the studio. Here's a little bit of what that sounds like.
Myers, he worked hard every day. He watched the mill take a man to early grave. Bending those rails was all he'd ever known. family. The mill was his home, you knew.
Yeah, it's a great tone. That was nothing. That was a 10-foot cable going from the guitar, Fat Telly, I believe, to the Brown Deluxe. I mean, my favorite amp. I mean, that's just an amazing tone. This is a Brown Princeton, a little bit different. It's kind of a combination. Like when I first heard this, it reminded me a lot of the Black Princeton. It just had a different top end to it, a different enunciation of the notes. But it still has that kind of vibe of that brown, that, I don't want to use brown as the adjective for the tone, but it is a little bit more of a kind of warmer tone, kind of a, rhythm-like richness there. Tremolo, which is cool. I'm going to be comparing these in a video at some point. You can do a lot with an amp like this. It's super versatile, but at the same time, I mean, we had people liking this Danelectro. We had people liking the Harmony. I've seen this listed locally for $100. This thing probably even cheaper. It's a no-namer. You can get good tone without having to spend the big bucks, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for something like these. Okay, you don't have to. They're just more versatile, is what it comes down to. Going on to the Blackface Princeton reverb. This one does not have the reverb. This one does. This is a great sounding reverb, actually. It's a great all-around amp. Ryan Adams plays these, but the funny thing is that the Bassman 59 is, I think, more of that Ryan Adams and the Cardinals sound. So just some interesting things, Tom Petty, Ryan Adams, Wilco. So it'll give you kind of some idea of who plays these things. Let me get the Bassman 59 put on the stool here. Okay, Bassman 59 reissue, and I've had experience with a boutique build called the Lil Dog Bassman 59, and it was all like souped up, really well built version of the 59, and it just did not want to break up. It was really tight. And it would have been great for pedals, but I like to have some breakup with the amp. And yes, this amp sounds great. It really breaks up well. It gets that Ryan Adams sound, It gets that kind of chimey sound. So it's not as chimey as like the Vox tone from the Tex here, but it's a really nice rhythm sound. It'll do lead, it'll do rhythm. Overall, a pretty versatile amp. Not just for the tone, but also just the size. It's got 4 10s in it, so I don't know. There's something about the size of the cabinet that I think really helps. I think in our examples, that was part of the sound. I mean, you could totally hear it in this little Vox here. This little Vox sounds like it's stuck in a closet or something. This Tex doesn't have that issue, I don't think. And this here, it just sounds massive. It sounds loud. You can't get that with a real small amp. Interesting note is that this cabinet is thicker and heavier, I think, than the Brown. It's just, the construction is just lighter. And there's something special about that in the tone. And I think the Oxford speaker, like the one in here, the 62 Oxford, I think the Deluxe has that Oxford in it too. So there's lots of things that goes into the tone. This cabinet is thicker, but I think the baffle's suspended, right? There's just so much that goes into guitar tone. You just have to improvise with it. So this is a 59 reissue. Good sounding amp. When you fire it up, this amp and this amp smells like dog piss. And this amp smells like old cigars. Okay, this is the Gretsch 6150. This is a great amp. Sounds great. Similar, but I think brighter than this, just with this arrangement. Of course, it's very Frankenstein together. My amp tech plugged this into a Marshall cabinet and it sounded fantastic. Really good. But this is like 5 watts. Really simple, a volume, that's it. So cool amp, but we blew this up. Me and Garrett blew this up and smoke came out the back. So I still got to get this in. Super Twin, 180 watts, Ted Nugent. This thing is almost useless, but weighing it at 100 pounds and 6 tubes, it actually is a great bass amp. The speakers are not so much. I've plugged it into another cabinet, but I've used it as is, as a bass cabinet. It sounds good. This is what I used before my Acoustic 150B. Yeah. So this thing sounds really good as a bass cabinet. As a guitar cabinet, it just sounds really clean and kind of not so interesting. It has a built-in distortion. Doesn't sound that great. It has way too many features. I don't know. I just wish I could bypass all this crap, right? And yeah, so it makes a great bass amp. A lot of people are taking this and mounting it, the head, into a Bandmaster head and using it as a bass amp. So I might do that one day, but for now it lives in the original cabinet. Mid-70s Super Twin. Okay, we got the Music Man 112RD65. No idea what all that stuff means, but I assume it's 65 watts. It's a hybrid. It's got some solid state parts to it. It's a really, I think, good, versatile sounding amp. It kind of sounds kind of grungy. Very different distortion than the harmonica amps. It's a tight distortion, kind of like the Vox Tone, which I think it's the EL34s, actually, now that I remember. Works really well for rhythm tracks. So yeah, Music Man. Okay, moving on to the Vox AC4. I've always been curious about this little guy, but it's really bright. I mean, I was blown away with like how much brightness this amp has. So I went from treble at 12 o'clock, which is gonna be this first example I'll play for you, and then treble it all the way down. Let's check it out. Okay, last up is the Acoustic 150B. This is a really cool bass amp, you know, it works really well. I've heard of people talking about just use amp sims for bass or don't bother, but to be honest, like, I mess with bass and you know, I can't get it to fit in the mix, and then I put it through this thing and mic it up, and all of a sudden my problems go away. All of a sudden the bass just sits in the mix. It's so simple. Same thing with the Super Twin. It just, all of a sudden, it just fit in the mix better. So this sits on top of the 215 cabinet, and there's no on switch. You just plug it in and you're live. So but it's a really cool sounding amp. So yeah, this is a little bit about the amp collection and how I like to use some of this stuff, what I like to use it for, and some of the strengths and weaknesses of each piece. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'll be hanging out in the comments below.